I have a problem tonight. And it's not just that I had to cut my speech down from 22 minutes. It's a problem which has been faced by men and women before me, and it's faced by John Boltman every single time he does work for the Legion of Mary. It's a problem which has stumped the most intelligent of men, and it's a problem which has been just a tad more difficult than breathing for a few peasant French girls like St. Joan of Arc and Bernadette Soubirous. Perhaps if I were a pious French girl, this would be no problem at all. Broadly, the problem is that I have to get you to believe in God. Specifically, I have to persuade you that you should investigate the Catholic Church with the potential for converting to the Church. I have to reach you where you are. And friends, you're everywhere. But despite your interior, abstract locality, you've all converged on this room tonight. And so you're not everywhere, but you're here. And so, like St. Paul, I have to be all things to all here. And if I get just one person to investigate the Catholic Church, I've done my job. Whosoever will be saved, before all things it is necessary that he hold the Catholic faith, which faith, except everyone do keep whole and undefiled, he shall perish everlastingly. That's from the Athanasian Creed. My aim tonight is to show you how you can do your part to attain the hope of salvation by converting and adhering to the Catholic faith as the resolution to this investigation. I'm going to cover a variety of topics. Number one, I'm going to cover how to address the history of the Catholic Church and its ontological reality, meaning the being of its reality, that it is the church which Christ established. I'm also going to condense my testimony and ask you to place yourself in my shoes so that the problems I had, the needs I had, the solutions I had become your problems, your needs, and your solutions. And hopefully, with my experience acting as an analog for yours, you will understand how you might be able to convert to the Catholic faith. Now, preachers and evangelists often don't start at the beginning of the story. That's exactly where I want to start tonight. The history of Christianity, that series of events which has led to the present and which will continue on to the future, starts in its exposition with a tree and its fruit, and Adam and an Eve and the consequences of eating that fruit. The climax of history also involves a tree and its fruit, a new Adam and a new Eve, and the consequences of eating that fruit. And from the climax to the denouement, those two trees, those two Adams, those two Eves, those two fruits, those two consequences reverberate throughout time and eternity and are at the center of this presentation tonight. And I'd like to hone in on that broad imagery of a tree and understand how we can address the claim of history that the Catholic Church is the true church which Christ established. And to do that, I'd like to address it through the corporate ancestry of the Catholic Church, as our classmate Hannah introduced us to the concept of the family tree. So the Catholic Church is the oldest church in Christianity, and this is attested not only by secular historians, but also by the continuity of doctrine from the church fathers in the first century to the teachings of the church today. The roots of the church, in some sense, go back to the Garden of Eden, where Satan was told by God he would put enmities between Satan's seed and a woman's seed. Now, that woman was not Eve, and that seed was not Seth or Abel or Cain. That woman was Mary, and she is the new Eve, just as Christ is the new Adam. And that new tree is the cross, and that new fruit is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament, or the Eucharist. Now, the trunk of the tree of the church is St. Peter, ultimately, because he was the head of the apostles. And he and the other apostles established churches throughout Asia Minor and the Middle East. And then finally, St. Peter and St. Paul went to pagan Rome, where they established the Roman Church. And there, St. Peter was martyred in 67 AD, leaving St. Linus as his successor. And St. Linus, as Bishop of Rome, had, by virtue of his office, the head over all of the other apostles and all of the other bishops. And those other bishops are the branches of the tree. Now, the papal authority of the trunk is the sap, and it goes out to the branches. And those branches give that sap to the twigs, who give it to the leaves, which are ultimately the people. And if you don't have the sap, you're not in communion with Rome. And there's two ways to not have this sap if you claim Christianity. The first way is through what's known as schism, where you cut yourself off. So whether you're a leaf or a twig or a branch, you cut yourself off from the tree for whatever reason. The other way is through the understanding of what's heresy. Heresy is where you were cut off by the tree, so you don't poison the rest of it. Now the Eastern Orthodox, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with, like the Russian Orthodox and whatnot, they're in a state of schism. Protestantism is in a state of heresy because it doesn't have the correct doctrine. Now, these leaves and branches and twigs which have been cut off or cut themselves off, they're not in the tree any longer. They're not in the church. And whether that particular religious flora on the ground of history, whether it be Lutheranism, which was started in 1517, or the Church of England started in 1534, or the Methodists started in 1744, or Mormonism started in 1829, whatever it is, history will not attest that it started in 33 AD. But it does attest that for the Catholic Church. So these others, what's their historical claim? Do they have a claim? Not if we want to consider those who are part of the church to be in the living tree. Now, as Hansen 2009 states, for G.K. Chesterton, who I mentioned in my second speech, for him, when he was in the process of converting, his question about the true church was essentially one of history. And it was the same for Cardinal John Henry Newman, who had been in the Church of England. And as Ormerod 2010 states, for Cardinal Newman, he expressed that to be deep in history was to cease to be a Protestant. And here's a little condensed version of my own testimony. It takes place over about, 20 some odd years. But I want you to place yourself in my shoes. And I want you to go with me on day-to-day life. I'm wondering, where am I going? What am I doing? What's the point of all this? Like many of you, perhaps, I was raised in a Christian home. I went to youth group. And, I was trying to figure out how to act out what I believed versus what the world was telling me I should do. Just like what Toby talked about in his speech. How do I let those two things interface? So as I left Mom and Dad's house, I lost a lot of my youthful optimism. I no longer had those feel-good sermons, the pop rock worship. And so in 2003, I joined the Army. 2005, I found myself in combat in Iraq. I lost a few friends. Started to seriously question even the very existence of God. In 2008, I found myself back in Iraq and in a situation that left me saying, God, just let me get out of this alive and I'll do whatever you tell me. Echoing in faithful paraphrase the last recorded words of the Blessed Virgin Mary in John chapter 2. Fast forward a few years, in 2010, my girlfriend broke up with me, and I remember sitting down on the couch, and the first thing out of my mouth was, now I can get right with God. So I started reading the Bible, naturally. I started checking out various churches. But none of them really had that certain je ne sais quoi for which I just, was looking. And then one day I saw a video by a woman named Ann Barnhart. And from that video I went to her blog. And on her blog she had an entry about marriage and what marriage is. And I was studying in chapter 19 of the book of Matthew about marriage and what Christ was saying about marriage. And I couldn't find any church which taught exactly what I had seen in those pages. And then there it was. The Catholic Church was teaching exactly what I had read. Uh-oh! Southern Baptist roots start tingling. Accusations of idolatry, worshiping Mary. This old guy in Rome who utters gospel truth every time he talks to the press about the price of tea in China, right? Not really. So I studied, and I studied some more, and I found the answers to those questions. And I'd get upset, and I'd get frustrated, and I'd study more. And every time I study, I'd learn something new. Things that really enthralled me to keep going. The historicity of the church, untouchable. The drama of things like religious women, such as Blessed Columba of Rieti, excoriating Pope Alexander VI for the things that he had done. Things like the beatification of St. Martin de Porres, being declared blessed by the church. He's a black man. And this was done at a time when Protestant America still considered blacks 3/5 of a human being. And here's the Catholic Church raising this man up to heaven. So I came to a fork in my journey and I had to make a decision. I knew through the amount of study that I had done that I had to either accept the church and thus accept Christ, or I had to reject the church and thus reject Christ. So I made a choice. And I joined the Catholic Church. It was terrifying. And as Dalforth 2010 says, I had to learn to rely on God. Because people don't choose God. God chooses people. And from there, people can choose God. And as Johnson 2012 states, I found out the reality that conversion is so painful. But it's a lot more painful to be in falsehood, and the truth is liberating. So tonight, I've talked to you basically about how you can understand the history of the church and how these particular claims throughout history can be measured. I've talked to you a little bit about my conversion. But what I haven't talked to you about, and I'm going to do right now, is the fact that if you do this one little thing, if you just investigate the church, I'm not saying you have to go join a monastery or anything like that, but just investigate the church, and you will have a radical power over the world. As James 2007 says, the world will become simply impotent to dominate you and subjugate you because you are doing something so simple as seeking after truth. Now, tonight we've been at the first of many forks. We've learned a lot from each other, both last week and tonight, and we'll continue to learn through the other speeches. What have we learned? We've learned about how we can use a fireman's boot and stand on the corner to raise money, or use that boot to rush into a burning building. How we can advocate for those who stand on the corner with no shoes asking for money. How to make the world smile a little healthier and brighter. We've learned about how we can help Colombian rebels take home and take back our own homes from the destruction that is modern advertising. We've learned about alternative health methods being wrestled away from Big Pharma and the lobbyists that they probably share with those privatized prison systems. We've learned about how the fresh soil of young minds can take on the seeds of knowledge if we'll just care about them. We've learned last week from Jake about how we can use our own intelligence to create artificial intelligence. How those who have been hurt can be healed. If any of you have read Dr. Rhea's dissertation, you've learned about how wild horses can drag a man towards hope, which takes them away from the stalls and the walls which hold them both. We've also learned how to trace our ancestry through our family tree. And if possible, we could trace it all the way back to a tree and an Adam and an Eve and a fruit and the consequences of eating that fruit. And forward into time, towards the climax of history, we would find a redemptive tree and a redemptive fruit and a new Adam and a new Eve and new consequences. And there, beneath the tree of the cross, as Catholics, we could stand there above the roots and next to the trunk and below the branches and the leaves of the family tree, which will never die. Whosoever will be saved, before all things it is necessary that he hold the Catholic faith, which faith except everyone do hold, or correction, do keep whole and undefiled, without doubt he shall perish everlastingly. I've walked the path of investigation, and I've walked the path of conversion. And I have to do it, if I have to do it again, and 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 again, with every single one of you, going through all that being upset, all that study, all that frustration, throwing St. Augustine's Confessions across the room. I'll do it, and I'll do it again, and again, and again. I don't know where all of you stand. We've learned very little about each other, despite the fact that we've learned so much. But, I wasn't always a Catholic. I was into punk rock, skateboarding, I played guitar, I was in a band. I gave up an academic scholarship to join the Army. But that was the one thing that allowed me to come to a point where I could say to God, I'll do whatever you tell me. And I did. Thank you.